Panicked, Mary felt her heart drop as the councilman's gavel slammed down, a metallic crack echoing through the silent city hall. As her petition to build tiny homes for homeless veterans was denied in public humiliation, her eyes stinging under the harsh news camera flashes and drawing a few satisfied smirks from the opposition benches. Yet in just 540 days, 50 veterans would live in the tiny homes she built. 6 months earlier, Mary was alone in her late husband's dusty workshop, the smell of sawdust and grief heavy in the air. In the dim garage, Mary traced a finger along the half-built rocking chair coated in fine sawdust. A final notice fluttered in her other hand, bold red text stating foreclosure in 30 days. Her chest tightened at the sight of the overdue mortgage bill. Losing the house on top of losing Jim would crush her completely. The only sounds were the creak of her knees on the wooden stool and a distant ticking clock on the wall. She inhaled the sharp scent of oak shavings and machine oil, memories of Jim's evening woodworking routine flooding back. His old wristwatch lay on the bench, its glass cracked and hands frozen at 6 go. That was the moment her world stopped. Mary wiped a tear with sawdust-stained knuckles. She needed $20,000 fast, or everything they built together would be gone. Her eyes fell to the rocking chair Jim had started carving before the cancer took him. Its twin sat finished in the corner, the one he made for her last birthday. A daring idea flickered. Sell one of the chairs to raise money. Mary's heart pounded at the thought of letting go of his handiwork. Could she really pawn a piece of their history to save their home? And even if she did, would anyone pay enough in time? Subscribe for more inspiring second-act stories. Sunlight and a dry autumn breeze swept through the open-air craft market as Mary nervously arranged the rocking chair at her booth. The rich smell of fresh apple cider from a nearby stall mixed with the aroma of polished pine. She could hear a distant folk guitar strumming a warm tune while shoppers milled about. Mary's palms were sweaty despite the crisp air. Across the table, her neighbor, an old friend named Linda, her anchor in grief, offered a reassuring nod. "You can do this," Linda murmured, handing Mary a checkered cushion for the chair. Mary forced a smile and patted the cushion into place, her fingers trembling. Within minutes, a middle-aged couple paused to admire the craftsmanship. The husband rocked the chair gently, the wooden legs thumping on the platform with a comforting rhythm. "My grandfather had one just like it," the wife said, voice tinged with nostalgia. Mary's throat tightened as they haggled politely. The sale was made for $400, a fraction of what it meant to her. As the couple carried Jim's chair away, Mary's eyes stung, but relief mingled with regret. She gripped Jim's cracked wristwatch in her coat pocket as if seeking his blessing. Just then, a coarse cough turned her head. A bearded man in a threadbare army jacket sat on a bench behind her booth, eyes fixed on the departing chair. His duffel bag and haunted gaze told his story. Mary felt a jolt, like the guitar's twang snapping a string. Why was a veteran sleeping out here as winter approached? And what could one widowed carpenter possibly do about it? Night settled over Mary's backyard with a chill and the chirp of crickets. Under the yellow glow of a hanging work lamp, she studied a sketch spread over her patio table. The blueprint lines of a tiny 8-12-foot structure were sketched in pencil, crude but clear. In the silence, the scratch of her pencil sounded loud, and the scent of wet leaves and varnish filled the air. Earlier that day, she'd given the coughing veteran a bowl of hot chili. She learned his name was Ray, a former Marine. He refused charity, insisting others had it worse. But Mary couldn't forget the tremble in his hands as he cradled the warm bowl. Now she was sketching a micro-home design on the back of an old cabinet schematic Jim had drawn years ago. She'd found a stack of Jim's unused lumber in the shed, enough to frame a tiny shelter. Hammer in hand, she approached the first plank balanced on cinder blocks. She swung. Clack, the nail bit into wood, and with it an ember of purpose sparked. Each swing echoed across the empty yard as stars emerged overhead. By week's end, the structure stood insulated and roofed, just big enough for one person. Mary's muscles ached. She pressed her blistered palm to her lips and tasted blood's metallic tang. She exhaled, watching her breath mist in the cold. Ray stood behind her now, wrapped in a borrowed coat, unbelieving. The tiny home was modest but sturdy, exuding the cedar smell of fresh lumber. Ray's eyes watered as he stepped inside to a clean cot and a propane heater that Mary had scrounged. Mary handed Ray the keys, a simple gesture of dignity. Suddenly, a harsh beam of light cut across the yard. A city code enforcement officer cleared his throat, disapproval radiating. "Ma'am, did you get a permit for this structure?" he barked, clipboard in hand. Mary's stomach dropped. Permit? She hadn't even thought of it. Her victory froze on her lips. What was she risking by sheltering a homeless veteran in her own yard? The next morning, Mary paced outside City Hall. She clutched a folder of paperwork so tightly her knuckles paled. Raindrops from last night's shower glistened on the steps, and the air smelled of damp concrete and anxiety. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed as she approached the zoning desk. Mr. Randall, the skeptic city clerk with thin-rimmed glasses, barely looked up. "Tiny dwelling units," he scoffed, flipping through her impromptu blueprints with a scowl. The only sound was the tap of his pen against the counter. He read the code sections aloud. According to ordinance, any dwelling had to be at least 500 square feet. Hers was a fifth of that. Mary's heart thudded in her ears. "I just want to keep a veteran from freezing," she pleaded quietly. She could smell the burnt coffee on Randall's desk. He glanced at her over the rims of his glasses. "Rules are rules," Randall said with a shrug. "You need a zoning variance. That takes a board hearing and months, if approved at all." The word months reverberated. Winter loomed in 8 weeks. Ray might not survive the cold that long. Mary's nails dug into her palm. She noticed a framed photo on the wall of a younger Randall shaking hands with the mayor. It showed them at a ribbon cutting for a luxury condo. Money and connections ruled here, not widows with scrap wood. The inner voice of doubt whispered, "This system is too big for you." Randall slid her papers back. He was already looking past her to the next person in line. A lump of anger and desperation rose in Mary's throat. She would not walk away empty-handed. In a trembling voice, she announced, "Then I'll request a hearing for that variance." Randall's eyebrow arched in surprise at her resolve. He slowly handed her the requisite forms. His long sigh was the only reply. Mary stepped into the lobby's chilly air, forms in hand. She had just 10 days to gather evidence and support before the zoning board meeting. Who would stand with her against City Hall? Determination fueled Mary as she rallied help in the following days. The crisp smell of newspaper ink filled her living room as she and Linda folded flyers detailing her mission. The flyers read, "Tiny Homes for Vets, Community Meeting on Nov 5. Each flyer bore a sketch of Ray's finished micro home. Mary's normally quiet phone buzzed constantly. The story had spread online after Linda's nephew posted a photo of Mary handing Ray the house keys. A local news van even showed up. The reporter's perfume wafted over the muddy worksite as she interviewed Mary and Ray. On screen that night, Mary's voice quivered but held firm. "No veteran who served our country should sleep on the street," she declared. "Not while I have wood and the will to help." The segment ended with the camera panning across the snug interior of Ray's tiny house. Inside, an American flag quilt lay on the cot. The reaction was electric. Donations trickled, then poured in. $5.20. Even a $5,000 check came from a retired general who saw the broadcast. More astonishing were the volunteers. A local contractor named Jorge offered his crew on weekends. A group of college engineering students emailed her plans for insulated flooring. The sound of phone notifications became Mary's daily soundtrack. Each ping was an affirmation that this crazy idea had ignited something. Her backyard transformed into a mini construction yard. By the end of the month, 4 more tiny homes stood in a neat row on a donated parcel of land. Linda had offered a corner of her farmland just outside town. Sawdust and sweat scented the autumn air as vets and locals worked side by side. Hammers clanged and laughter echoed across the field. One afternoon, Mary watched a formerly skeptical neighbor help Ray paint his new front door blue. She clutched Jim's old wristwatch in her palm and silently thanked him for lending her his strength. But as the community support grew, so did Mary's sense of responsibility. The zoning board hearing loomed tomorrow. Mary caught herself awake at 3 a.m., heart pounding like a hammer on a nail. What if the board still said no despite the momentum? If she failed, these homes, now housing 5 veterans, could be ordered torn down. As dawn broke, Mary loaded her paperwork and a model tiny home onto her truck for the hearing. She forced down coffee and felt its bitter taste turn her stomach. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jorge. "Good luck today. We've got your back." She smiled, but her hands still trembled on the steering wheel. This had to work. It just had to. Or would all their progress collapse with one vote? City Hall was packed to the brim, the smell of paper and cologne thick in the overheated chamber. Mary stood at the podium under harsh fluorescent light. A small wooden model of a tiny home was perched in front of her like a lone chess piece. Behind her, Ray and 3 other veterans from her project sat quietly in the audience. Caps in hand, they waited silently. Linda gave her a thumbs up from the front row. Mary's voice cracked as she introduced herself and her petition. She described cold nights and empty backyards. The ticking of the big wall clock echoed her husband's watch against her wrist. Each second felt heavier than the last. The zoning board members listened stony-faced, except one who peered over his glasses thoughtfully. Mary passed around photos of the 5 tiny houses standing sturdy against the October sky. For a moment, hope sparkled. She saw one board member smile at the image of Ray's flag quilt. But then the opposition spoke. A lawyer hired by a group of irate neighbors stepped up, slick and sharp-tongued. He cited fire codes, property values, and referred to Mary's project as a shantytown experiment. The words landed like blows. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mary's palms sweated as she clutched the edges of the podium. The metallic taste of fear filled her mouth. She glanced back at the veterans. She saw their shoulders sag. A vote was called. The room fell silent but for the shuffle of papers. Mary's heart thumped in her ears. One by one, the board members cast their votes. "Denied," declared the chairwoman, voice cutting through Mary's hopes. The gavel came down with a loud crack, sealing the decision. Gasps and a few cheers from the opposing side rose up. Mary's vision blurred. It felt like the floor had dropped from under her feet. She fumbled to pack up her model home as reporters' camera flashes strobed. Ray reached out to steady her, his rough hand on her shoulder. Mary opened her mouth to apologize to him, but no words came out. She had failed in public, on record. As she stepped off the podium, the inner saboteur's voice roared in her mind. "You were foolish to think a 60-year-old widow could change anything." The board members filed out, indifferent. Mary stood there amid the commotion, cheeks burning with shame. Was this really how her crusade would end? Defeated, with everything she'd built about to be dismantled. Chapter 7. That night, Mary sat in the dark of her living room. The only light was a sliver of moon through the window onto Jim's empty rocking chair. The silence was suffocating. Even the old clock on the mantel had wound down and stopped. Mary's eyes fell on the dusty toolbox by the chair. Jim's tools, her tools now. She picked up his hammer, its worn oak handle fitting firmly in her grip. The scent of aged pine and steel clung to it, bringing a wave of memories. Her phone buzzed once on the table, then twice, then incessantly. She almost ignored it, but something made her look. Text after text rolled in. Linda texted, "We're not giving up." Jorge added, "Meet tomorrow, same place." Even Randall, the city clerk who had dismissed her, sent a short note. "Sorry about tonight. Don't quit." Mary's breath caught. She stood, joints protesting. She realized the fight wasn't over unless she walked away. Early next morning, Mary returned to City Hall, this time not alone. A crowd was gathered on the steps in the orange sunrise glow. Veterans in uniform, neighbors with signs, even the mayor. He had gotten wind of the controversy overnight after the local news aired the dramatic vote. The crisp smell of morning dew mixed with hope as people parted to let Mary through. On the top step, Ray stood next to Linda holding up a large envelope. "We appealed," he said, voice firm. Inside, Mary found signatures, hundreds of them. There was also a legal motion to override the zoning decision by emergency ordinance. Her hands shook, not with fear this time, but with gratitude and resolve. The mayor cleared his throat, the crowd's chatter quieting. He announced that the council would hold a special session that very day. They couldn't ignore the public outcry. Mary felt Linda squeeze her arm as they all moved inside together. By midnight, a unanimous vote reversed the decision. Mary's tiny homes were safe. Permission was granted to build even more on city-donated land. Cheers erupted. Mary closed her eyes amidst the jubilation, letting tears of relief roll down. In her mind, she whispered to Jim, "We did it." Weeks later, Mary stood before a cheering crowd at the grand opening of the new Veterans Village of 50 tiny homes. The crisp scent of pine lumber and autumn leaves filled the air as she cut the ribbon. Around her, veterans moved into their snug new houses, laughing and crying with their families. Mary felt Jim's watch ticking steadily on her wrist again, synchronized with her racing heart. The empty rocking chair at home would never truly be filled, but 50 doors had opened to fill empty hearts across the community. Mary saved her community by giving others a home. But could purpose ever fill the emptiness of her loss? Share this story to inspire others.